Oh, well, time for artful. He took a step back, stopped, and saw what was happening behind Coates. He tried to hide it, but he couldn't stop the momentary flash of relief in his eyes. Coates couldn't stop the momentary flicker of attention. Vimes punched up, the scabbard an extension of his arm. The stiff leather caught the man under the chin, thrusting his head back. Then the leather was brought down on the sword hand, and, as an afterthought, Vimes kicked Ned on the shin just enough to make him collapse. He'd always had an allergy to edged weapons too near his face. "Well done! Nice try," he said, and turned his back and faced the crowd. To the sound of gurgling behind him, he said, "Anything's a weapon used right. Your bell is a club. Anything that pokes the other man hard enough to give you more time is a good thing. Never, ever threaten anyone with your sword unless you really mean it, because if he calls your bluff, you suddenly don't have many choices, and they're all the wrong ones. Don't be frightened to use what you learned when you were kids. We don't get marks for playing fair, and for close-up fighting, as your senior sergeant, I explicitly forbid you to investigate the range of koshies, blackjacks and brass knuckles sold by Mrs. Goodbody at number 8 Easy Street, at a range of prices and sizes to suit all pockets, and should any of you approach me privately, I absolutely will not demonstrate a variety of specialist blows suitable for these useful yet tricky instruments. Right, let's limber up. I want you all out here with your truncheons in 2 minutes. You think it's just a silly club? I will show you otherwise. Jump to it." He turned to the stricken Ned, who'd raised himself to a sitting position. "Nice moves, Mr. Coates. You didn't learn them in the watch, I know that. Anything we need to discuss? Care to tell me where you were last night? Morphic Street, maybe?" "Day off," muttered Ned, rubbing his jaw. Right. None of my business. Seems to me we failed to hit it off, Ned." "'S right. You think I'm some kind of spy? I know you're not John Keel." Vimes kept his face perfectly impassive, which was, he realised, a complete giveaway in itself. "Why do you say that?" he said. "I don't have to tell you. You ain't a watch sergeant either, and you were lucky just now, and that's all I'm saying." Ned got to his feet as the other watchman filed out into the yard again. Vimes let him go, and turned his attention to the men. None of them had ever been taught anything. They'd learned, to a greater or usually a lesser extent, from one another, and Vimes knew where that road went. On that road, coppers rolled drunks for their small change and assured one another that bribes were just perks, and it got worse. He was all for getting recruits out on the street, but you had to train them first. You needed someone like detritus bellowing at them for 6 weeks, and lectures about duty and prisoners' rights and the service to the public, and then you could hand them over to the street monsters who told them all the other stuff, like how to hit someone where it wouldn't leave a mark, and when it was a good idea to stick a metal soup plate down the front of your trousers before attending to a bar brawl. And if you were lucky and they were sensible, they found somewhere between impossible perfection and the pit where they could be real coppers. Slightly tarnished because the job did that to you, but not rotten. He formed them into twos and set them attacking and defending. It was dreadful to watch. He let it go on for 5 minutes. All right, he said, clapping his hands. "Very good indeed. When the circus comes to town, I'll definitely recommend you." The men sagged and grinned sheepishly as he went on. "Don't you know any of the moves? The throat slam? The red-hot poker? The rib rattler? Say I'm coming at you with a big club. What would you do?" "Run away, Sarge," said Wiglet. There was laughter. "How far can you run?" said Vimes. "Got to fight sometime. Lance Corporal Coates." Ned Coates had not been taking part. He'd been leaning against the wall in a sort of stationary swagger, watching the sad show with disdain. "Sarge," he said, propelling himself upright with the minimum of effort. "Show Wiglet how it's done." Coates pulled his truncheon. It was, Vimes saw, custom-made, slightly longer than the general issue. He took up station in front of the constable, with his back very expressively towards Vimes. "What do you want me to do, Sarge?" he said over his shoulder. "Show him a few decent moves, take him by surprise." "Right you are, Sarge." Vimes watched the desultory clatter of sticks. 1, 2, 3, and around Ned came, truncheon whistling through the air, but Vimes ducked under the blow and caught the man's arm in both hands, twisting it up behind his back and bringing his ear into immediate conjunction with Vimes's mouth. "Not quite unexpected, Sunshine," he whispered. "Now, we'll both keep grinning because the lads are laughing at our Ned. Isn't he a card who keeps having a go at the old Sarge, and we don't want to spoil their fun? I'm letting you go now, but you try it on one more time, and you'll have to use both hands to pick up a spoon. And you'll need to pick up a spoon, Ned, because of living off soup by reason of having no damned teeth." He relaxed his grip. "Who taught you this stuff, anyway?" "Sergeant Keel, Sarge," said Ned. "You're doing a good job, Sergeant Keel." Vimes turned to see Captain Swing advancing across the yard. He was smaller and slimmer in daylight, and he looked like a clerk, and a clerk who was only erratically careful about his appearance. His hair was lank, and the thick black strands plastered across a central bald spot suggested that the man had either no mirror or completely lacked a sense of humour. His coat, in the light, was old-fashioned but well cared for, but his buckled shoes were scuffed and generally downtrodden. Vimes's mother would have had something to say about that. A man ought to look after his boots, she always said. You could tell a man by the shine of his shoes. Swing also carried a walking stick, or rather an opera cane. It was just possible that he thought it made him look sophisticated, rather than, say, like a man carrying an unnecessary length of wood. It was certainly a sword stick, because it rattled when it hit the pavement, and it did so now as he primly picked his way through the old targets and strawed debris. "Keeping the men up to scratch, I see," he said. "Very well done. Is your captain here?" "I believe not," said Vimes, letting Coates go. "Sir." "Ah, well, perhaps you will give him this, Sergeant Keel." Swing gave him a faint smile. "You had a successful night, I am given to understand?" "We had a few visitors," said Vimes. "Sir?" "Ah, yes. Misplaced zeal? It does not pay to underestimate you, Sergeant. You are a man of resource. Alas, the other houses were not so resourceful." "Ah, yes. I am afraid, Sergeant, that some of my keener men feel you are an obstacle to our very needful work. I, on the contrary, believe that you are a man of iron adherence to the law, and while this has led to elements of friction because of your lack of full understanding of the exigencies of the situation, I know that you are a man after my own heart." Vimes considered the anatomical choices. "That would be broadly correct, sir," he said, "although I would not aspire that high." "Capital. I look forward to our future cooperation, Sergeant. Your new captain will undoubtedly inform you of other matters as he sees fit. Good day." Swing swivelled and walked his jerky walk back to the gate. His men turned to follow him, but one of them, who was wearing a plaster cast on one arm, made a gesture. "Morning, Henry," said Vimes. He examined the letter. It was quite thick and had a big embossed seal, but Vimes had spent too much time in the company of bad men and knew exactly what to do with a sealed envelope. He also knew how to listen. New captain. So it was starting. The men were watching him. "They're calling in more soldiers, Sarge," said Snouty. "I expect so," said Vimes. "They gave Captain Tilden the push, didn't they?" "Yeah." "He was a good captain," Snouty protested. "Yes," Vimes said. No, he thought, he wasn't. He was a decent man, and he did his best, that's all. He's well out of it now. "What are we going to do now, Sarge?" said Lance Constable Vimes. "We'll patrol," said Vimes. "Close in. Just these few streets." "What good'll that do?" "More good than if we didn't, lad. Didn't you take the oath when you joined up?" "What oath, Sarge?" He didn't, Vimes remembered. A lot of them hadn't. You just got your uniform and your bell, and you were a member of the night watch. A few years ago, Vimes wouldn't have bothered about the oath either. The words were out of date, and the shilling on a string was a joke. But you needed something more than the wages, even in the night watch. You needed something else to tell you that it wasn't just a job. "Snoutley, nip up to the captain's office and get the shilling, will you?" said Vimes. "Let's get this lot sworn in. And where's Sergeant Knock?" "Pushed off, Sarge," said Wiglet. I don't know if it helped, but he said, "To hell with him," when he went out the door. Vimes counted heads. It had been said, later on, that all the watch house stayed on. They hadn't, of course. Some had slipped away, some hadn't come back on duty at all. But it was true about Keel and the line. "OK, lads," he said. "It's like this. We know what's been going on. I don't know about you, but I don't like it. Once you get troops on the streets, it's only a matter of time before it goes bad. Some kid throws a stone, next minute there's houses on fire and people getting killed. What we're going to do is keep the peace. That's our job. We're not going to be heroes. We're just going to be normal. Now," he shifted position, "it might just be that someone will say we're doing something wrong, so I'm not going to order you." He drew his sword and scratched a line across the mud and stones. "If you step over the line, then you're in," he said. "If you don't, then that's fine. You didn't sign up for this, and I doubt there'll be any medals, whatever happens. I'll just ask you to go, and the best of luck to you." It was almost depressing how quickly Lance Constable Vimes crossed the line. Fred Colon came next, and Waddy, and Billy Wiglet, and Spatchcock, Cullweather, and Moist, and Leggy Gaskin, and Horace Nancy Ball, and Curry, wasn't it? And Evans, and Pounce. A dozen crossed the line, the last few with the reluctance caused by a battle between peer pressure and a healthy regard for their skin. A few others, more than Vimes had hoped, evaporated at the back. That left Ned Coates. He crossed his arms. "You're all bloody mad," he said. "We could use you, Ned," said Vimes. "I don't want to die," said Ned, "and I don't intend to. This is stupid. There's not a dozen of you. What can you do? All that stuff about keeping the peace, it's rubbish, lads. Coppers do what they're told by the men in charge. It's always like that. What'll you do when the new captain comes in, eh? And who are you doing this for? The people? They attack the other houses, and what's the night watch ever done to hurt them?" "Nothing," said Vimes. "There you are, then." "I mean, the watch did nothing, and that's what hurt them," said Vimes. "What could you do, then? Arrest Winder?" Vimes felt he was building a bridge of matchsticks over a yawning abyss, and now he could feel the chilly winds below him. He'd arrested Vetinari back in the future. Admittedly, the man had walked free after what passed for the due process of law, but the City Watch was going to be big enough and strong enough and well connected enough to actually arrest the ruler of the city. How had they ever got to that stage? How had he even dreamed that a bunch of coppers could slam the cell door on the boss? Well, perhaps it had started here. Lance Constable Vimes was watching him intently. "Of course we can't," he said, "but we ought to be able to. Maybe one day we will. If we can't, then the law isn't the law. It's just a way of keeping people down." "Looks like you've woken up and smelled the khaki," said Coates, "because that's exactly what you're in. Sorry, lads, but you're going to die. That's what'll happen if you tangle with real soldiers. Remember Dolly sisters last night? 3 dead and they weren't even trying." "Come on, Ned. No one's going to have a go at us who are just patrolling," mumbled Colon. "Patrolling for what?" said Coates. "To keep the peace? What'll you do when there's no peace left to keep? Well, I'm not going to stand around and see you get killed. I'm off." He turned and strode out of the yard and into the watch house. "You bloody fool, you're right," Vimes thought. "I just wish you weren't so right." "Still with us, lads?" he said to the group caught behind the line. "That's right, Sarge," said Lance Constable Vimes. The rest of the volunteers seemed slightly less certain. "Are we going to get killed?" said Wiglet. "Who says it's going to come to a fight?" said Vimes, watching Coates' retreating back. "Wait a moment, I want a word with Ned." "Got the singing, Sarge," Snouty announced, advancing across the yard, "and the captain wants a word with you." "Tell him I'll be up there in just a few—" "It's a new captain," said Snouty quickly. "He's there already. Keen, military, not the patient type, Sarge." "I used to have carrot and detritus and angua and cheery for this," Vimes thought bitterly. "I'd say you do this and you do that, and all I had to do was fret and deal with the sodding politics." "Get Fred to swear the men in," he said, "and tell the officer I'll be with him shortly." He ran through the watch house and out the front door. There were a lot of people in the street, more than usual. It wasn't a mob as such, but it was Ankh-Morpork's famous mob. The state you got just before a real mob happened. It spread across the city like web and spider, and when some triggering event happened, twanged its urgent message through the streets and thickened and tightened around the spot. The Dolly Sisters massacre had got around, and the numbers had grown in the telling. Vimes could sense the tension on the web. It was just waiting for some idiot to do the wrong thing, and nature is bountiful where idiots are concerned. "Coates!" he yelled. To his surprise, the man stopped and turned. "Yeah? I know you're with the revolutionaries. You're just guessing." "No. You had the password in your notebook," said Vimes. "The same one Dibbler was passing out in pies. You must know I was able to get into the lockers. Look, do you think you and Dibbler would still be walking around if I was a spy for Swing? Sure, you're not after us. We can be mopped up later. Swing wants the leaders." Vimes stood back. "OK, why haven't you told the lads?" "Things are moving, that's why. It's all starting," said Ned. "Who you are doesn't matter any more, but you're going to get all the lads killed. They'd have been on our side if it wasn't for you. I was working on them. You know Spatchcock always drops his sword on his foot, and Nancy Bull wets himself when he's threatened, and Vimes he is simple, and now you're going to stick 'em all in the middle, and they're going to die, and all for no reason." "Why haven't you told them?" Vimes repeated. "Maybe you got friends in high places," Ned snarled. Vimes glanced up at the rooftops. "Have we finished?" said Ned. "Give me your badge," said Vimes. "You what?" "You're quitting, fair enough. Give me your badge." Coates recoiled as if he'd been stung. "Blow that." "Then leave the city," said Vimes. "It'd be for your own good." "Is that a threat?" "Not from me. But here's some advice, boy. Don't put your trust in revolutions. They always come round again. That's why they're called revolutions. People die and nothing changes. I'll see you later." He turned his back and hurried away so that the man wouldn't see his face. OK. Now it was time. It had to be now, or he'd burst like Mr. Salsiferous. He had wanted to do this, hadn't dared try it, because those monks could probably do a man a lot of no good if he crossed them, but it had all gone too far now. A sense of duty told him there was an officer waiting to see him. He overruled it. It was not in possession of all the facts. Vimes reached the entrance to the watch-house and stopped. He shut his eyes. If anyone bothered to look at him, they'd have seen a man apparently trying to grind 2 cigarette stubs into the road, one with each foot. "Thank you, Rosie, for those cardboard souls." He smiled. He thought with the brains in his feet. And as young Sam had noticed, the feet had a memory of their own. Rounded cat-head cobbles, the usual kind. They hadn't been well set in this part of the city and moved very slightly underfoot. Then, twice before getting to the watch-house, his feet had felt larger cobbles, narrow bands of them where the road surface had been replaced after drains had been laid. And before that, there'd been a similar band, but of soft brick rubble, so crushed by cartwheels that it was practically a gully. A few dozen steps earlier, they'd twirled him round a couple of times, but the last surface before that had been mud. Vimes, who had been walking with his eyes shut, bumped into a cart. Mud, he thought, getting up and ignoring the strange looks of passers-by. That meant an alley. Let's see. Yes, over there. It took 20 minutes. People turned as he walked through the streets, closing his eyes when he dared, so that his feet could see better. Sometimes he did look around, though, and there it was again, the thunderstorm sensation of tensions building up, waiting for the first little thing. People were uneasy. The herd was restless, and he didn't know quite why. Everyone he looked at returned his gaze blankly. He stepped onwards, rough flagstones between 2 stretches of the ancient cobbles they called troll heads. The only place where you got that in this part of the city was here, where Pewter Street crossed Elm, and before that it had been, big stones, some of the most ancient in the city, rotted by hundreds and hundreds of years of iron-bound cartwheels. That was a road that had been right behind a city wall. Yes, he crossed the pits, still on Elm, and then lost his thread. A metal grating on the pavement gave it back to him. Cellar grating, cool cellar, coat of arms knit worn down, butter market. Yep, go feet. The monks had turned him again here, but long bricks, hard-fired in the kiln, and a stretch of quite modern flagstones, well-dressed and fitted. It could trick you if you didn't know you were in, Mason's Road, and there were masons here, and they looked after the surface. Now find an alley, mud but with a lot of gravel in it, because the stonemasons dumped their waste here, but this one has occasional hummocks across it, where pipes have been laid. Yeah, now find square head cobbles. He opened his eyes. Yeah. Away on his left was a block of 3 buildings, a temple sandwiched between 2 cheap-jack corner shops. It was just a temple, slightly foreign-looking, but weren't they all? It looked high Hublandish, where everyone lived on yaks or something. The temple doors were locked. He rattled the handle impotently, then hammered on the woodwork with his sword. It had no effect. He didn't even leave a mark on the wood. But the door of the shonky shop next door was open. It was a familiar place. Once upon a time it was his tailor and bootmaker, and like a pawn shop, a shonky shop was always open. Vimes stepped inside and was immediately enveloped in dusty darkness. It was a cave of cloth, racks of old suits hung from the ceiling, ancient shelves bent under piles of shirts and vests and socks. Here and there old boxes loomed in the gloom and caught his knees. Piles of derelict boots slipped and slid under his feet. And there was the smell. If poverty had a smell, this was it. If humbled pride had a smell, this was it. And there was a touch of disinfectant as well. Within a few feet of the door, Vimes was already lost. He turned and shoved his way through grey aisle after grey aisle of suffocating cloth and wondered if anyone had ever died in here and how anyone could ever find their way out. He pulled aside a hanger containing a greasy, threadbare suit. "You want?" He turned. There was no one there, until his gaze fell slightly and met that of a small, glossy little man, totally bald, very small and thin, and wearing some vague clothing that presumably even a shonky shop hadn't been able to unload on a customer. Who was he? Who was he? Surprisingly, the name seemed quite fresh in the memory. Yeah, Mr. Shine?" "Sunshine Sun," said Mr. Soon. He grabbed the suit Vimes was still holding. Good eye, lovely cloth, owned by priest, very good. 50 pence to you, shame to sell it, times are hard." Vimes hastily put the suit back on the rack and pulled out his badge. Soon glared at it. "I pay already other copper," he said. $1, 1 month, no trouble. Already I pay other copper." "Pay?" said Vimes. "2-stripe copper already I pay. $1, 1 month, no trouble." "Corporal Quirk," muttered Vimes. "You don't have to pay coppers, Mr. Soon. We're here for your protection." Despite his barely basic grasp of the language, Mr. Soon's expression suggested very clearly that the 3-stripe 1-crown copper in front of him had dropped in from the planet Idiot. "Look, I haven't got time for this," said Vimes. "Where's the back door? This is watch business." I pay protection. 1 month, no trouble." Vimes grunted and set off along another narrow, cloth-lined tunnel. A glint of glass caught his eye, and he sidled crabwise up a choked aisle until he found a counter. It was piled with more hopeless merchandise, but there was a bead-curtained doorway behind it. He half clambered, half swam over the piles and scrambled into the tiny room beyond. Mr. Soon pushed his way to an ancient tailor's dummy. It was so scratched, chipped and battered, it looked like something dug up from the volcanic ash of an ancient city. He pulled on an arm, and the eyes lit up. "Number 3 here," he said into its ear. "He's just gone through, and boy, is he angry." The back door was locked, but yielded under the weight of Vimes's body. He staggered into the yard, looked up at the wall separating this greasy space from the temple's garden, jumped, scrabbled his boots on the brickwork, and dragged himself onto the wall, feeling a couple of bricks crumble away underneath him. He landed on his back and looked up at a thin, robed figure sitting on a stone seat. "Cup of tea, Commander?" said Sweeper, cheerfully. "I don't want any damned tea," shouted Vimes, struggling to his feet. Sweeper dropped a lump of rancid yak butter in the tea bowl beside him. "What do you want then, Mr. Vimes with the very helpful feet?" "I can't deal with this, you know what I mean." "You know, some tea really would calm you down," said Sweeper. "Don't tell me to be calm. When are you going to get me home?" A figure stepped out of the temple. He was taller, heavier man than Sweeper, white-haired and with the look of a good-natured bank manager about him. He held out a cup. Vimes hesitated a moment and then took the cup and poured the tea out on the ground. "I don't trust you," he said. "There could be anything in this." "I can't imagine what we could put in tea that would make it any worse than the way you normally drink it," said Sweeper calmly. "Sit down, Your Grace, please." Vimes sagged onto the seat. The rage that had been driving him sank a little too, but he could feel it bubbling. Automatically, he pulled out a half-smoked cigar and put it in his mouth. "Sweeper said you'd find us one way or another," said the other monk. "So much for secrecy." "Why should you worry?" said Vimes. "You can just play around with time and it won't have happened, right?" "We don't intend to do that," said the other monk. "What could I do anyway? Go around telling everyone that those loony monks you see in the streets are some kind of time shifters? I'd get locked up. Who are you anyway?" This is Q," said Sweeper, nodding at the other monk. "When the time comes, he'll get you back, but not yet." Vimes sighed. The anger had drained, leaving only a hopeless, leaden feeling. He stared blankly at the strange rockery that occupied most of the garden. It looked oddly familiar. He blinked. "I've been talking to people today who are going to die," he said. "How do you think that makes me feel? Do you know what that feels like?" The monks gave him a puzzled look. Yes," said Q. "We do," said Sweeper. "Everyone we talk to is going to die. Everyone you talk to is going to die. Everyone dies." "I've been changing things," said Vimes, and added defensively, "Well, why shouldn't I? Carceries? I have no idea how things are going to turn out. I mean, doesn't it change history even if you just tread on an ant?" "For the ant, certainly," said Q. Sweeper waved a hand. "I told you, Mr. Vimes, history finds a way. It's like a shipwreck. You're swimming to the shore. The waves will break whatever you do. Is it not written? The big sea does not care which way the little fishes swim. People die in their due time. Keel didn't. Carcer mugged the poor devil." "His due time in this present, Commander," said Q. "But he will pay his part in the other, Mr. Vimes, eventually. You'll reach the shore. You must, otherwise." "There's no shore," said Sweeper. "No," said Vimes. "There's got to be more. I'm not swimming, I'm drowning. It was fun, do you know, at first, like a boys' night out, feeling the street under me boots again. But now, what about Sybil? Are my memories real? What I know is she's a girl living with her dad. Is there somewhere where she's my wife having my child? I mean, really? Is it all in my mind? Can you prove it? Is it happening? Will it happen? What is real?" The monks were silent. Sweeper glanced at Q, who shrugged. He glanced rather more meaningfully, and this time Q made that dismissive little wave of the hand which is someone signifying all right, against my better judgment. Then Sweeper said, "Yes," very slowly. "Yes, I think we can help, Commander. You want to know there's a future waiting. You want to hold it in your hand. You want to feel the weight of it. You want one point to navigate by, one point to steer for. Yes, I think we can help you there, but you must climb back over that wall, and Sergeant Keel plays his part. He sees it all through to the end. He gives the orders he feels are right, and they will be the right orders. He holds the line. He does the job." "He's not the only one," said Vimes. "Yes, Commander Vimes has a job in hand too. Don't worry. I'm not leaving Carcer behind," growled Vimes. "Good. We'll be in touch." Vimes tossed the stump of his cigar aside and looked up at the wall. "All right," he said. "I'll see it through. But when the time comes, we will be ready," said Sweeper. "Just so long as you—" He stopped. There was another subtle sound, scaly in its way, a sort of silicon slither. "My goodness," said Q. Vimes looked down. The cigar butt still smouldered, but around it the garden of inner-city tranquillity was moving, pebble sliding over tiny pebble. A large, water-rounded rock floated gently around, spinning, and then Vimes became aware that the whole garden was spinning, turning on the little wisp of smoke. A spent match sailed past, rolling from stone to stone like a scrap of food passed from ant to ant. "Is it meant to do that?" he said. "In theory, yes," said Sweeper. "I should leave right now, Mr. Vimes." Vimes took one last look at the moving garden, shrugged, and then heaved himself over the wall. The two monks stared. The tide of little stones was gently pushing the stub into the centre. "Astonishing," said Q. "He's part of the pattern now. I don't know how you manage it." "I'm not doing it," said Sweeper. "Q, can we—" "No more time-shifting," said Q. "It's caused quite enough trouble." "Fair enough," said Sweeper. "Then I'll need to send out search parties. The fences, the bench jewellers, the pawn shops. We'll find it. I understand our friend. The job's not enough. He needs one real thing, and I know what it is." They looked again at the turning, shifting garden, and felt the fingers of history spreading out and into the world. Vimes tried not to run back to the watch-house because too many people were standing around in groups, and even a running uniform could be risky. Besides, you didn't run for officers. He was a sergeant. Sergeants walked with a measured tread. To his mild surprise, the men were still out in the yard. Someone had even hung up the swordsmanship targets, which would certainly be helpful if the watchman were faced with an enemy who was armless and tied to a pole. He climbed the stairs. The captain's door was open, and he saw that the new man had repositioned his desk so that he could see out onto the landing and down the stairs. Not a good sign, not a good sign at all. An officer shouldn't see what was going on. He should rely on his sergeants to tell him what was going on. That way things ran smoothly. This man was keen. Oh dear. The new captain looked up. Oh, good grief, Vimes thought. It's bloody Rust this time round. And it was indeed the Honourable Ronald Rust, the god's gift to the enemy, any enemy, and a walking encouragement to desertion. The Rust family had produced great soldiers by the undemanding standards of deduct your own casualty from those of the enemy, and if the answer is a positive sum, it was a glorious victory, school of applied warfare. But Rust's lack of any kind of military grasp was matched only by his high opinion of the talent that he in fact possessed only in negative amounts. It hadn't been Rust last time. He vaguely remembered some other dim captain. All these little changes, what would they add up to? I bet he's only just been made a captain, thought Vimes. Just think of the lives I could save by accidentally cutting his head off now. Look at those blue eyes. Look at that stupid curly moustache. And he's only going to get worse. "Are you Kill?" The voice was a bark. "Yes, sir." "I sent an order for you to come up here an hour ago, man." "Yes, sir. But I've been on duty all night and morning, and there's been rather a lot to attend to. I expect an order to be obeyed promptly, Sergeant." "Yes, sir, so do I. That's why discipline starts at the top, Sergeant. The men obey you, you obey me, I obey my superiors." "Glad to hear it, sir." Rust had the same firm grip of common politeness, too. "What is all that going on in the yard?" Vimes steered according to the prevailing wind. "Bit of morale building, sir, instilling a bit of esprit de corps," and hit a reef. Rust raised his eyebrows. "Why?" he said. "The men's job is to do what they're told, as is yours. A group hug is not part of the arrangements, is it?" "A bit of camaraderie helps the job along, sir, in my experience." "Are you eyeballing me, Keel?" "No, sir. I am wearing an expression of honest doubt, sir. Eyeballing is 4 steps up, right after looking at you in a funny way, sir. By standard military custom and practice, sir, sergeants are allowed to go all the way up to an expression of acute—" "What's that pip over your stripes, man?" "Means sergeant at arms, sir. They were a special kind of copper." The captain grunted and glanced at the papers in front of him. "Lord Winder has received an extraordinary request that you be promoted to lieutenant, Sergeant. It has come from Captain Swing of the Particulars. and his lordship listens to Captain Swing. Oh, and he wants you to be transferred to the particulars. Personally, I think the man's mad. I'm 100% behind you there, sir. You do not wish to be a lieutenant? No, sir. Too long for Dick and too short for Richard, sir, said Vimes, focusing on a point a few inches above Rust's head. What? Neither one thing nor the other, sir. Oh, so you'd like to be a captain, eh? Said Rust, grinning evilly. No, sir. Don't want to be an officer, sir. Get confused when I see more than one knife and fork on the table, sir. You certainly don't look like officer material to me, Sergeant. No, sir. Thank you, sir. Good old Rust. Good young Rust. The same unthinking rudeness masquerading as blunt speaking, the same stiff-neckedness, the same petty malice. Any sergeant worth his salt would see how to make use of that. Wouldn't mind transferring to the particulars, though, sir, he volunteered. It was a bit of a gamble, but not much. Rust's mind was reliable. I expect you would like that, Keel, said Rust. No doubt you ran rings round that old fool Tilden, and don't fancy the idea of a captain with his finger on the pulse, eh? No, you can damn well stay here, understand? Wonderful, thought Vimes. Sometimes it's like watching a wasp land on a stinging nettle. Someone's going to get stung, and you don't care. Yes, sir, he said, eyes still staring straight ahead. Have you shaved today, man? Excused shaving, sir, Vimes lied. Doctor's orders. Been sewn up on a face, sir. Could shave one off, sir. He remained at eye front, while Rust grudgingly stared at him. The cut was still pretty livid, and Vimes hadn't dared look under the patch yet. Hit yourself in the face with your own bell, did you? Grunted the captain. Vimes' fingers twitched. Very funny, sir, he said. Now, go and get the men fell in, Keel. Look sharp, I shall inspect them in a moment. And tell that idiot with the flat nose to clear the stable. Sir? My horse will be arriving shortly. I don't want to see that disgusting screw in there. What? Turn out Marilyn, sir, said Vimes, genuinely shocked. That was an order. Tell him to jump to it. What do you want us to do with her, sir? I don't care. You're a sergeant, you've had an order. Presumably there are knacker men. People round here must eat something, no doubt. Vimes hesitated a moment. Then he saluted. Right you are, sir, he said. Do you know what I saw on the way here, Sergeant? Couldn't say, sir, said Vimes, staring straight ahead. People were building barricades, Sergeant. Sir? I know you heard me, man. Well, it's to be expected, sir. It's happened before. People get jumpy. They hear rumours of mobs and out-of-control soldiers. They try to protect their street. It is a flagrant challenge to government authority. People can't take the law into their own hands. Well, yes, but these things generally run their course. My gods, man, how did you manage to get promoted? Vimes knew he should leave it at that. Rust was a fool, but at the moment he was a young fool, which is more easily excused. Maybe it was just possible, if caught early enough, that he could be upgraded to idiot. Sometimes it pays to, he began. Last night, every watch house in the city was mobbed, said Rust, ignoring him. Except this one. How do you account for that? His moustache bristled. Not being attacked was definite proof of Vimes's lack of moral fibre. It was just a case of, apparently, a man attempted an assault on you. Where is he now? I don't know, sir. We bandaged him up and took him home. You let him go? Yes, sir, he was... But Rust was always a man to interrupt an answer with a demand for the answer he was in fact interrupting. Why? Sir, because at that time I thought it prudent to... 3 watchmen were killed last night, did you know that? There were gangs roaming the streets. Well, martial law has been declared. Today we're going to show them a firm hand. Get your men together now. Vimes saluted, turned about and walked slowly down the stairs. He wouldn't have run for a big clock. A firm hand, right. Gangs roaming the streets. Well, we sure as hell never did anything when they were criminal gangs. And when you've got madmen and idiots on either side and everything hangs in the balance, well, trouble is always easy to find when you have enough people looking for it. One of the hardest lessons of young Sam's life had been finding out that the people in charge weren't in charge. It had been finding out that governments were not, on the whole, staffed by people who had a grip, and that plans were what people made instead of thinking. Most of the watchmen were clustered around the stairs. Snouty was quite good at internal communications of the worrying kind. "Tidy yourselves, lads," said Vimes. "Captain will be down in a few minutes. Apparently it's time for a show of strength." "What strength?" said Billy Wiglet. "Ah, Billy, what happens is the vicious revolutionaries take one look at us and scuttle off back to their holes," said Vimes. He was immediately sorry he'd said that. Billy hadn't learned irony. "I mean, we just give the uniforms an airing," he translated. "We'll get cheesed," said Fred Colon. "Not if we stick together," said Sam. "Right," said Vimes. "After all, we're heavily armed men going on patrol amongst civilians who are, by law, unarmed. If we're careful, we shouldn't get too badly hurt." Another bad move. Dark sarcasm ought to be taught in schools, he thought. Besides, armed men could get into trouble if the unarmed civilians were angry enough, especially if there were cobblestones on the streets. He heard the distant clock strike 3. Tonight, the streets would explode. According to the history books, it would be one shot that did it around sunset. One of the foot regiments would be assembled in Hen and Chicken's field awaiting orders, and there would be people watching them. Troops always drew an audience. Impressionable kids, the inevitable Ankh-Morpork floating street crowd, and of course the ladies whose affection was extremely negotiable. The crowd shouldn't have been there, people said afterwards, but where should they have been? The field was a popular spot. It was the only vaguely green space in that part of the city. People played games there, and of course there was always the progress of the corpse on the gibbet to inspect. Besides, there were troops, ordinary foot soldiers, people's sons and husbands, taking a bit of a rest and having a drink. Oh, that was right. Afterwards it was said that the troops were drunk, and that they shouldn't have been there. Yep, that was the reason, Vimes reflected. No one should have been there. But they were, and when that captain got an arrow in his stomach and was groaning on the ground, some of the crossbowmen fired in the direction of the shot. That's what the history book said. They fired at the house windows where people had been watching. Perhaps the shot had come from one of them. Some arrows fell short, some did not, and there were people who fired back. And then, one after another, horrible things would happen. By then it was too late for them not to. The tension would unwind like a spring, scything through the city. There were plotters. There was no doubt about that. Some had been ordinary people who'd had enough. Some were young people with no money who'd objected to the fact that the world was run by old people who were rich. Some were in it to get girls, and some had been idiots as mad as swing, with a view of the world just as rigid and unreal, who were on the side of what they called the people. Vimes had spent his life on the streets, and had met decent men and fools and people who'd steal a penny from a blind beggar and people who'd performed silent miracles or desperate crimes every day behind the grubby windows of little houses, but he'd never met the people. People on the side of the people always ended up disappointed in any case. They found that the people tended not to be grateful or appreciative or forward-thinking or obedient. The people tended to be small-minded and conservative and not very clever, and were even distrustful of cleverness. And so the children of the revolution were faced with the age-old problem. It wasn't that you had the wrong kind of government, which was obvious, but that you had the wrong kind of people. As soon as you saw people as things to be measured, they didn't measure up. What would run through the streets soon enough wouldn't be a revolution or a riot. It'd be people who were frightened and panicking. It was what happened when the machinery of city life faltered, the wheels stopped turning, and all the little rules broke down. And when that happened, humans were worse than sheep. Sheep just ran. They didn't try to bite the sheep next to them. By sunset, a uniform would automatically be a target. Then it wouldn't matter where a watchman's sympathies lay. He'd be just another man in armour. "What?" he said, snapping back to the present. "You're right, Sarge," said Corporal Colon. Said Vimes as the real world returned. "You were well away," said Fred, "staring at nothing. You ought to have had a proper sleep last night, Sarge." "There's plenty of time to sleep in the grave," Vimes said, looking at the ranks of the watch. "Yeah, I heard that, Sarge, but no one wakes you up with a cup of tea. I got 'em lined up, Sarge." Fred had made an effort, Vimes could see. So had the men themselves. He'd never seen them looking quite so formal. Usually they had a helmet and a breastplate apiece. Beyond that, equipment was varied and optional, but today, at least, they looked neat. Shame about the heights. No man could easily inspect a row that included Wiglet at one end and Nancy Ball at the other. Wiglet was so short that he'd once been accused of navelling a sergeant, being far too short to eyeball anyone, while Nancyball was always the first man on duty to know when it was raining. You had to stand well back to get both of them into vision without eye strain. "Well done, lads," he managed, and heard Rust coming down the stairs. It must have been the first time the man had seen his new command in full. In the circumstances, he bore up quite well. He merely sighed. He turned to Vimes and said, "I require something to stand on." Vimes looked blank. "Sir?" "I wish to address the men in order to inspire them and stiffen their resolve. They must understand the political background to the current crisis." "Oh, we know all about Lord Winder being a loony, sir," said Wiglet cheerfully. Frost nearly formed on Rust's forehead. Vimes drew himself up. "Squad dismiss!" he shouted, and then leaned towards Rust as the men scuttled away. "A quiet word, sir." "Did that man really say—" Rust began. "Yes, sir. These are simple men, sir," said Vimes, thinking quickly. "Best not to disturb them, if you take my meaning." Rust inserted this into his range of options. Vimes could see him thinking. It was a way out, and it suited his opinion of the watch in general. It meant that he hadn't been cheeked by a constable, he'd merely dealt with a simpleton. "They know their duty, sir," Vimes added for reinforcement. "Their duty, Sergeant, is to do what they're told." "Exactly, sir." Rust stroked his moustache. "There is something in what you say, Sergeant. And you trust them?" "As a matter of fact, sir, yes." "We will make a circuit of the surrounding streets in 10 minutes. This is a time for action. Reports are disturbing. We must hold the line, Sergeant." And he believes it, thought Vimes. He really does. The watchmen marched out into the afternoon sunshine, and did so badly. They were not used to marching. Their normal method of progress was the stroll, which is not a recognised military manoeuvre, or the frantic withdrawal, which is. In addition, the convection currents of prudent cowardice were operating in the ranks. There was a definite sideways component to each man's progress, as he sought to be in the middle. The watchmen had shields, but they were light wickerwork things intended to turn blows and deflect stones. They wouldn't stand up to anything with an edge. The advance, therefore, was by means of a slowly elongating huddle. Rust didn't notice. He had a gift for not seeing things he did not want to see, and not hearing things he did not want to hear. And what he saw was a barricade. Ankh-Morpork wasn't really a city, not when the chips were down. Places like Dolly Sisters and Knapp Hill and Seven Sleepers had been villages once, before they were absorbed by the urban sprawl. On some level they still held themselves separate. As for the rest, well, once you got off the main streets it was all down to neighbourhoods. People didn't move around much. When tension was high, you relied on your mates and your family. Whatever was going down, you tried to make sure it wasn't going down your street. It wasn't revolution. It was quite the reverse. It was defending your doorstep. They were building a barricade in Whalebone Lane. It wasn't a particularly good one, made up mostly of overturned market stalls, a small cart, and quite a lot of household furniture, but it was a symbol. Rust's moustache bristled. "Right in our faces," he snapped. "Absolute defiance of constituted authority, Sergeant. Do your duty." "And what would that be at this point, sir?" said Vimes. "Arrest the ringleaders, and your men will pull the barricade down." Vimes sighed. "Very well, sir. If you will stand back, I shall seek them out." He walked up to the domestic clutter, aware of eyes watching him before and behind. When he was a few feet away, he cupped his hands. All right, what's going on here?" he shouted. He was aware of whispering, and he was ready for what happened next. When the stone flew over the top of the furniture, he caught it in both hands. "I asked a civil question," he said. "Come on." There was more whispering. He distinctly heard, "That's the sergeant from last night," and some sort of sotto voce argument. Then a voice shouted, "Death to the fascist oppressors!" This time the argument was more frantic. He heard someone say, "Oh, all right," and then, "Death to the fascist oppressors, present company accepted. There, is everyone happy now?" He knew that voice. "Mr. Reginald Shue, is it?" "I regret that I have only one life to lay down for Whalebone Lane," the voice shouted from somewhere behind a wardrobe. If only you knew, Vimes thought. "I don't think that'll be necessary," he said. "Come on, ladies and gentlemen. Is this the only way to behave? You can't take the law into your own hands." His voice faltered. Sometimes it takes the brain a little while to catch up with the mouth. Vimes turned and looked at the squad, who needed no prompting at all to hang back, and then he turned to look at the barricade. Where exactly was the law right now? What did he think he was doing? The job, of course, the one that's in front of you. He'd always done it, and the law had always been out there, but somewhere close. He'd always been pretty sure where it was, and it definitely had something to do with the badge. The badge was important. Yes, it was shield-shaped, for protection. He'd thought about that in the long nights in the darkness. It protected him from the beast, because the beast was waiting in the darkness of his head. He'd killed werewolves with his bare hands. He'd been mad with terror at the time, but the beast had been there inside, giving him strength. Who knew what evil lurked in the hearts of men? A copper, that's who. After 10 years you thought you'd seen it all, but the shadows always dished up more. You saw how close men lived to the beast. You realized that people like Carcer were not mad. They were incredibly sane. They were simply men without a shield. They'd looked at the world and realized that all the rules didn't have to apply to them, not if they didn't want them to. They weren't fooled by all the little stories. They shook hands with the beast. But he, Sam Vimes, had stuck by the badge, except for that time when even that hadn't been enough and he'd stuck by the bottle instead. He felt as if he'd stuck by the bottle now. The world was spinning. Where was the law? There was a barricade. Who was it protecting from what? The city was run by a madman and his shadowy chums, so where was the law? Coppers liked to say that people shouldn't take the law into their own hands, and they thought they knew what they meant. But they were thinking about peaceful times, and men who went around to sort a neighbour out with a club because his dog had crapped once too often on their doorstep. But at times like this, who did the law belong to? If it shouldn't be in the hands of the people, where the hell should it be? People who knew better? And then you got Winder and his pals, and how good was that? What was supposed to happen next? Oh yes, he had a badge, but it wasn't his, not really. And he'd got orders, and they were the wrong ones. And he'd got enemies for all the wrong reasons, and maybe there was no future. It didn't exist anymore. There was nothing real, no solid point on which to stand, just Sam Vimes where he had no right to be. It was as if his body, trying to devote as many resources as possible to untangling the spinning thoughts, was drawing those resources from the rest of Vimes. His vision darkened, his knees were weak. There was nothing but bewildered despair, and a lot of explosions. Havelock Vetinari knocked politely on the window of the little office just inside the Assassin's Guild main gate. The duty porter raised the hatch. "Signing out, Mr. Maroon," said the assassin. "Yes, sir," said Maroon, pushing a bid ledger towards him. "And where are we off to today, sir?" "General reconnoitring, Mr. Maroon. Just generally looking around." "Ah, I said to Mrs. Maroon last night, sir, that you are a great one for looking around," said Mr. Maroon. "We look and learn, Mr. Maroon, we look and learn," said Vetinari, signing his name in the book and putting the pen back in its holder. "And how is your little boy?" "Thank you for asking, sir. He's a lot better," said the porter. "Glad to hear it." "Oh, I see the Honourable John Bleedwell is out on the commission. To the palace?" No, sir," said Maroon, grinning and waving a finger. "You know I couldn't tell you that, sir, even if I knew." Of course not. Vetinari glanced at the back wall of the office where, in an old brass rack, were a number of envelopes. The word "active" was inscribed at the top of the rack. "Good afternoon, Mr. Maroon." "Afternoon, sir. Good, looking around." He watched the young man walk out into the street. Then Maroon went into the cubbyhole next to the office and put the kettle on. He rather liked young Vetinari, who was quiet and studious and, it had to be said, a generous young man on appropriate occasions, but a bit weird all the same. Once Maroon had watched him in the foyer standing still. That was all he was doing. He wasn't making any attempt at concealing himself. After half an hour, Maroon had wandered over and said, "Can I help you, sir?" And Vetinari had said, "Thank you, no, Mr. Maroon, I'm just teaching myself to stand still." To which there wasn't really any sensible comment that could be made. And the young man must have left after a while because Maroon didn't remember seeing him again that day. He heard a creak from the office and poked his head around the door. There was no one there. As he made the tea, he thought he heard a rustle from next door and went to check. It was completely empty. Remarkably so, he thought later on. It was almost as if it was even more empty than it would be if there was just, well, no one in it. He went back to his comfy armchair in the cubbyhole and relaxed. In the brass rack, the envelope marked Bleedwell J slid back slightly. There were a lot of explosions. The firecrackers bounced all over the street, tambourines thudded, a horn blared a chord unknown in nature, and a line of monks danced and twirled around the corner, all chanting at the tops of their voices. Vimes, sagging to his knees, was aware of dozens of sandalled feet gyrating past and grubby robes flying. Rust was yelling something at the dancers, who grinned and waved their hands in the air. Something square and silvery landed in the dirt, and the monks were gone, dancing into an alleyway, yelling and spinning and banging their gongs. "Wretched heathens!" said Rust, striding forward. "Have you been hit, Sergeant?" Vimes reached down and picked up the silver rectangle. A stone clanged off Rust's breastplate. As he raised his megaphone, a cabbage hit him in the ear. Vimes stared at the thing in his hand. It was a cigar case, slim and slightly curved. He fumbled it open and read, "To Sam, with love from your Sibyl." The world moved, but now Vimes felt like a ship, drifting at anchor. At the end of the tether there was the tug of the anchor, pulling it around so that it faced the current. A barrage of missiles was coming over the barricade. Throwing things was an old Ankh-Morpork custom, and there was something about Rust that made him a target. With what dignity he could muster, he raised the megaphone again and got as far as, "I hereby warn you," before a stone spun it out of his hand. "Very well, then," he said, and marched stiffly back to the squad. "Sergeant Keel, order the men to fire 1 round of arrows over the top of the barricade." "No," said Vimes, standing up. "I can only assume you've been stunned, Sergeant," said Rust. "Men, prepare to execute that order. First man that fires, I will personally cut that man down," said Vimes. He didn't shout. It was a simple, confident statement of precisely what the future would hold. Rust's expression did not change. He looked Vimes up and down. "Is this mutiny then, Sergeant?" said the captain. "No. I'm not a soldier, sir. I can't mutiny." "Martial law, Sergeant," snapped Rust. "It is official." "Really?" said Vimes, as another rain of rocks and old vegetables came down. "Shields up, lads." Rust turned to Fred Colon. "Corporal, you'll put this man under arrest." Colon swallowed. "Me?" "You, Corporal, now." Colon's pink face mottled with white as the blood drained from it. "But he began. "You won't? Then it seems I must," said the captain. He drew his sword. At that, Vimes heard the click of a crossbow's safety catch going off and groaned. He didn't remember this happening. "You just put that sword away, sir, please," said the voice of Lance Constable Vimes. "You will not shoot me, you young idiot. That would be murder," said the captain calmly. "Not where I'm aiming, sir." Bloody hell, thought Vimes. Maybe the lad was simple, because one thing Rust wasn't was a coward. He thought idiot stubbornness was bravery. He wouldn't back down in the face of a dozen armed men. "Ah, I think I can see the problem, Captain," Vimes said brightly. "As you were, Lance Constable. There's been a slight misunderstanding, sir, but this should sort it out." It was a blow he'd remember for a long time. It was sweet. It was textbook. Rust went down like a log. In the light of all his burning bridges, Vimes slipped his hand back into his hip pocket. "Thank you, Mrs. Goodbody, and your range of little equalizers." He turned to the watchmen, who were a tableau of silent horror. "Let the record show Sergeant-at-Arms John Keel did that," he said. "Vimes, what did I tell you about waving weapons around when you're not going to use them?" "You laid him out, Sarge," Sam squeaked, still staring at the sleeping captain. Vimes shook some life back into his hand. "Let the record show that I took command after the captain's sudden attack of insanity," he said. "Waddy, Wiglet, Drag him back to the house and lock him up, will you?" "What are we going to do, Sarge?" wailed Colon. Keep the peace. That was the thing. People often fail to understand what that meant. You'd go to some life-threatening disturbance like a couple of neighbours scrapping in the street over who owned the hedge between their properties, and they'd both be bursting with aggrieved self-righteousness, both yelling. Their wives would either be having a private scrap on the side or would have adjourned to a kitchen for a shared pot of tea and a chat, and they all expected you to sort it out. And they could never understand that it wasn't your job. Sorting it out was a job for a good surveyor and a couple of lawyers, maybe. Your job was to quell the impulse to bang their stupid fat heads together, to ignore the affronted speeches of dodgy self-justification, to get them to stop shouting and to get them off the street. Once that had been achieved, your job was over. You weren't some walking god dispensing finely tuned natural justice. Your job was simply to bring back peace. Of course, if your few strict words didn't work, and Mr. Smith subsequently clambered over the disputed fence and stabbed Mr. Jones to death with a pair of gardening shears, then you had a different job, sorting out the notorious hedge argument murder. But at least it was one you were trained to do. People expected all kinds of things from coppers, but there was one thing that sooner or later they all wanted. Make this not be happening. Make this not be happening. "What?" he said, suddenly noticing a voice that had in fact been on the edge of awareness for some time. "I said, was he insane, Sarge?" But when you're falling off the cliff, it's too late to wonder if there might have been a better way up the mountain. "He asked you to shoot at people who weren't shooting back," growled Vimes, striding forwards. "That makes him insane, wouldn't you say?" "They are throwing stones, Sarge," said Colon. "So? Stay out of range. They'll get tired before we do." In fact, the barrage of missiles from the barricade had ceased. Even in a time of crisis, the people of Ankh-Morpork would stop for a decent piece of street theatre. Vimes walked back towards them, stopping on the way to retrieve Rust's bent megaphone. As he approached, he cast his eye over faces just visible through the chair legs and junk. There would be unmentionables somewhere, he knew, helping matters along. With luck, they wouldn't have bothered with Whalebone Lane. There was muttering from the defenders. Most of them had a look Vimes recognised, because it was the one he was trying to keep off his own face. It was the look of people whose world had suddenly been swept from under them, and now they were trying to tap dance on quicksand. He tossed away the stupid, pompous megaphone. He cupped his hands. "Some of you know me," he shouted. "I'm Sergeant Keel, currently in command of the Treacle Mine Road Watch House, and I order you to dismantle this barricade." There was a chorus of jeers and one or two badly thrown missiles. Vimes waited stock still until they died away. Then he raised his hands again. "I repeat, I order you to dismantle this barricade," he took a breath and went on, "and rebuild it on the other side on the corner with Cable Street, and put up another one at the top of Shear Street, properly built. Good grief, you don't just pile stuff up for God's sake. A barricade is something you construct. Who's in charge here?" There were sounds of consternation behind the overturned furniture, but a voice called out, "You?" There was nervous laughter. "Very funny. Now laugh this one off. No one's interested in us yet. This is a quiet part of town. But when things really go bad, you're going to have cavalry on your backs, with sabres. How long would you last? But if you shut off this end of Treacle Mine and the end of Shear, then they're left with alleyways, and they don't like that. It's up to you, of course. We'd like to protect you, but me and my men will be behind the barricades over here." He turned on his heel and marched back to the waiting watchman. "Right, lads," he said. "You heard. Pounce and Gaskin, you take the hurry-up wagon up to the bridge and turn it over. Waddy and Nancy Ball, you too, Fred, go and nick some carts. You grew up round here, so don't tell me you've never done that before. I want a couple blocking the streets down here, and the rest, I want you to run them into an alley mouths until they wedge. You men know the area. Block up all the little back ways." Colon rubbed his nose. "We could do that on the riverside, Sarge, but it's all alleys on the shade side. Can't block 'em all." "I wouldn't worry about those," said Vimes. "Cavalry can't come through there. You know what they call a horse in the shades?" Colon grinned. "Yeah, Sarge, lunch." "Right. The rest of you, get all the benches and tables out of the watch house." It dawned on him that none of the men had moved. There was a certain problem in the air. "Well?" Billy Wiglet removed his helmet and wiped his forehead. How far is this going to go, Sarge? All the way, Billy. But we took the oath, Sarge, and now we're disobeying orders and helping rebels. Doesn't seem right, Sarge, said Wiglet wretchedly. You took an oath to uphold the law and defend the citizens without fear or favour, said Vimes, and to protect the innocent. That's all they put in. Maybe they thought those were the important things. Nothing in there about orders, even from me. You're an officer of the law, not a soldier of the government. One or two of the men looked longingly at the other end of the street, empty and inviting. But I won't stop anyone who wants to walk, said Vimes. They stopped looking. Hello, Mr. Keel, said a sticky voice behind him. Yes, Nobby, he said without turning round. Here, how'd you detect it was me, Sergeant? It's an amazing talent, kid, said Vimes, turning, against all wisdom, to look at the urchin. What's been happening? Big riot in St. All Square, Sarge. They say people have broken into Dolly's sister's watch house and thrown the lieutenant out the window. And there's looting all over the place, they say, and the day watch are out chasing people, only most of them are hiding now, 'cause... Yeah, I get the picture, sighed Vimes. Carcer had been right. Coppers were always outnumbered, so being a copper only worked when people let it work. If they refocused and realised you were just another standard idiot with a pennyworth of metal for a badge, you could end up a smear on the pavement. He could hear shouting now a long way off. He looked around at the hesitant watchman. On the other hand, gentlemen, he said, if you are going to leave, where are you going to go to? The same thought had clearly occurred to Colon and the others. We'll get the cots, he said, hurrying off. And I want a penny, said Nobby, holding out a grubby hand. To the boy's amazement, Vimes gave him $1, saying, and just keep telling me everything, will you? Tables and benches were already being dragged out of the watch house, and after only a couple of minutes, Waddy arrived with a cartload of empty barrels. Barricades were easy in these streets. It was keeping them clear that had always been the problem. The watchmen set to work. This was something they understood. They'd done it when they were kids, and perhaps they thought, hey, this time we're wearing uniforms. We can't be in the wrong. While Vimes was struggling to wedge a bench into the growing wall, he was aware of people behind him. He worked steadily, however, until someone gave a delicate cough. Then he turned. Yes, can I help you? There was a small group of people, and it was clear to Vimes that it was a group pushed together out of shared terror because, by the look of them, they'd have nothing to do with one another if they could possibly avoid it. The spokesman, or at least the one in front, looked almost exactly like the kind of person Vimes had pictured when thinking about the Hedge argument murder. Officer? Yes, sir. What, are you doing exactly? Keeping the peace, sir. This peace, to be exact. You say that there's rioting and soldiers on the way? Very likely, sir. You don't have to ask him, Rutherford. It's his duty to protect us, snapped the woman who was standing beside the man with an air of proprietorship. Vimes changed his mind about the man. Yes, he had that furtive look of a timid domestic poisoner about him, the kind of man who would be appalled at the idea of divorce, but would plot woman slaughter every day. And you could see why. He gave the lady a nice warm smile. She was holding a blue vase. Can I help you, ma'am? He said. What are you intending to do about us being murdered in our beds? She demanded. Well, it's not 4 o'clock yet, ma'am, but if you'll let me know when you want to retire. Vimes was impressed at the way the woman drew herself up. Even Sybil, in full Duchess mode with the blood of 20 generations of arrogant ancestors behind her, could not have matched her. Rutherford, are you going to do something about this man? She said. Rutherford looked up at Vimes. Vimes was aware that he was villainously unshaven, dishevelled, dirty, and probably starting to smell. He decided not to load more troubles on the man's back. Would you and your lady care to assist with our barricade? He said. Oh, yes, thank you, very, Rutherford began, but was outgunned again. Some of that furniture looks very dirty, said Mrs. Rutherford. And aren't those beer barrels? Yes, ma'am, but they're empty ones, said Vimes. Are you sure? I refuse to cower behind alcohol. I have never approved of alcohol, and neither has Rutherford. I can assure you, ma'am, that any beer barrel in the presence of my men for any length of time will be empty, said Vimes. You may rest assured on that score. And are your men sober and clean living? The woman demanded. Whenever no alternative presents itself, ma'am, said Vimes. This seemed acceptable. Mrs. Rutherford was like rust in that respect. She listened to the tone of voice, not the words. I think perhaps it would be a good idea, dear, if we made a haste to, Rutherford began. Not without father, said his wife. No problem, ma'am, said Vimes. Where is he? On our barricade, of course, which was, let me tell you, a rather better barricade altogether. Jolly good, ma'am, said Vimes. If he'd like to come over here, we'll... You don't quite understand, sir, murmured Rutherford. He is, on the barricade. Vimes looked at the other barricade and then looked harder. It was just possible to see, near the top of the piled-up furniture, an overstuffed armchair. Further examination suggested that it was occupied by a sleeping figure in carpet slippers. He's very attached to his armchair, sighed Rutherford. It's going to be an heirloom, said his wife. Be so kind as to send your young men to collect our furniture, will you? And be careful with it. Put it at the back somewhere where it won't get shot at. Vimes nodded at Sam and a couple of the other men as Mrs. Rutherford picked her way over the debris and headed for the watch-house. Is there going to be any fighting? Said Mr. Rutherford anxiously. Possibly, sir. I'm not very good at that sort of thing, I'm afraid. Don't worry about that, sir. Vimes propelled the man over the barricade and turned to the rest of the little group. He'd been aware of eyes boring into him, and now he traced the rays back to source, a young man with black trousers, a frilly shirt, and long hair. This is a ruse, isn't it? Said the man. You'll get us in your power and we'll never be seen again, eh? Stay out then, Reg, said Vimes. He cupped his hands and turned back to the Whalebone Lane barricade. Anyone else who wants to join us had better get a move on, he shouted. You don't know that's my name, said Reg Shoe. Vimes stared into the big protruding eyes. The only difference between Reg now and the Reg he'd left back in the future was that Constable Shoe was rather greyer and was held together in places by stitches. Zombiehood would come naturally to Reg. He was born to be dead. He believed so strongly in things that some kind of inner spring kept him going. He'd make a good copper. He didn't make a very good revolutionary. People as meticulously fervent as Reg got real revolutionaries worried. It was the way he stared. You're Reg Shoe, he said. You live in Whalebone Lane. Oh, you've got secret files on me, they? Said Reg with terrifying happiness. Not really, no. Now, if you be so good, I'll bet you've got a big file on me a mile long, said Reg. Not a whole mile, Reg, no, said Vimes. Listen, Reg, I demand to see it. Vimes sighed. Mr. Shoe, we don't have a file on you. We don't have a file on anyone, understand? Half of us can't read without using a finger. Reg, we are not interested in you. Reg Shoe's slightly worrying eyes remained fixed on Vimes's face for a moment, and then his brain rejected the information as contrary to whatever total fantasy was going on inside. Well, it's no good you torturing me because I won't reveal any details about my comrades in the other revolutionary cells, said Reg. OK, I won't then. Now, perhaps that's how we work, see? None of the cadres knows about the other ones. Really? Do they know about you? Said Vimes. For a moment, Reg's face clouded. Pardon? Well, you said you don't know about them, said Vimes. So, do they know about you? He wanted to add, You're a cell of one, Reg. The real revolutionaries are silent men with poker player eyes and probably don't know or care if you exist. You've got the shirt and the haircut and the sash, and you know all the songs, but you're no urban guerrilla. You're an urban dreamer. You turn over rubbish bins and scrawl on walls in the name of the people who'd clip you round the ear if they found you doing it. But you believe. Ah, so you're a secret operative, he said, to get the poor man off the hook. Reg brightened. That's right, he said. The people are the sea in which the revolutionary swims. Like swordfishes, Vimes tried. Pardon? And you're a flounder, thought Vimes. Ned's a revolutionary. He knows how to fight and he can think, even if he is on the skew. But Reg, you really ought to be indoors. Well, I can see you're a dangerous individual, he said. We'd better have you where we can keep an eye on you. Hey, that's right. You can undermine the enemy from within. The relieved Reg raised a fist in salute and carried a table to the new barricade with revolutionary speed. There was some hurried conversation behind the old makeshift barricade, already being denuded of Mrs. Rutherford's furniture. This was interrupted by the clatter of hoofbeats from the far Fecal Mine Road and a sudden burst of instant decisiveness on the part of the remainder of the crowd. They poured towards the new official barricade, with Lance Constable Vimes bringing up the rear, fairly well hampered by a dining-room chair. "Mind out for that," shouted a female voice from somewhere behind him. "It's one of a set." Vimes put his hand on the young man's shoulder. "Just give me your crossbow, will you?" he said. The horseman came closer. Sam Vimes was not good at horses. Something in him resented being addressed by anyone 8 feet above the ground. He didn't like the sensation of being looked at by nostrils. He didn't like being talked down to. By the time they'd reached the barricade, he'd clambered around to the front of it and was standing in the middle of the street. They slowed down. It was probably the way he didn't move, but held the crossbow in the nonchalant manner of someone who knows how to use it, but has decided not to for the moment. "You there," said a trooper. "Yeah," said Vimes. "Are you in charge?" "Yeah, can I help you?" "Where are your men?" Vimes jerked a thumb towards the growing barricade. On the top of the heap, Mrs. Rutherford's father was snoring peacefully. "Well, that's a barricade," said the trooper. "Well done." "There's a man waving a flag." Vimes turned. Surprisingly, it was Reg. Some of the men had brought out the old flag from Tilden's office and stuck it on the barricade, and Reg was the sort to wave any flag going. "Probably high spirits, sir," said Vimes. "Don't worry, we're all fine." "It's a damn barricade, man! A rebel barricade!" said the second trooper. Oh boy, thought Vimes. They have shiny, shiny breastplates and wonderfully fresh pink faces. "Not exactly. It's... Are you stupid, fellow? Don't you know that all barricades are to be torn down by order of the patrician?" The third horseman, who had been staring at Vimes, urged his horse a little closer. "What's that pip on your shoulder, officer?" he said. "Means I'm sergeant-at-arms, special rank. And who are you?" "He doesn't have to tell you that," said the first trooper. "Really?" said Vimes. The man was getting on his nerves. "Well, you're just a trooper and I'm a bleeding sergeant, and if you dare to speak to me like that again, I'll have you down off that horse and thump you across the ear, understand?" Even the horse took a step backwards. The trooper opened his mouth to speak, but the third horseman raised a white-gloved hand. Oh dear, thought Vimes, focusing on the sleeve of the red jacket. The man was a captain. Not only that, he was an intelligent one by the look of him. He hadn't mouthed off until he had a chance to assess the situation. You got them sometimes, they could be dangerously bright. "I note, Sergeant-at-Arms," said the captain, enunciating the rank with care and without apparent sarcasm, "that the flag over the barricade is the flag of Ankh-Morpork." "It's the one at our watch-house," said Vimes, and added, "Sir." "You know that the patrician has declared that the building of barricades is an act of rebellion?" "Yes, sir." "And?" said the captain patiently. "Well, he would say that, sir, wouldn't he?" The faintest hint of a smile skimmed across the captain's face. "We can't allow lawlessness, Sergeant-at-Arms. If we all disobeyed the law, where would we be?" "There's more coppers per person behind that barricade than anywhere else in the city, sir," said Vimes. "You could say it's the most law-abiding place around." Now there was the sound of raised voices from behind the barricade. "We own all your helmets, we own all your shoes, we own all your generals, touch us and you'll lose. More porkia, more porkia, more por... "Rebel song, sir," said trooper number 1. The captain sighed. "If you listen, Hepplewhite, you might note that it is the national anthem sung very badly," he said. "We can't allow rebels to sing that, sir." Vimes saw the captain's expression. It had a lot to say about idiots. "Raising the flag and singing the anthem, Hepplewhite, are, while somewhat suspicious, not in themselves acts of treason," said the captain, "and we are urgently required elsewhere." He saluted Vimes, who found himself returning the salute. "We shall leave you, Sergeant-at-Arms. I trust your day will be full of interest. In fact, I know it." "But it's a barricade, sir," the trooper insisted, glaring at Vimes. It's just a pile of furniture, man. People have been spring cleaning, I expect. You'll never be an officer if you can't see straight. Follow me, if you please." With a last nod to Vimes, the captain led his men away at a trot. Vimes leaned against the barricade, put the crossbow on the ground, and fished out the cigar case. He fumbled in his pocket, pulled out the battered carton of little cigars, and with some delicacy slotted them into place. To the left was Cable Street. In front, Treacle Mine Road stretched all the way to Easy Street. Now, if a man could get barricades all the way up to Easy Street, there'd be quite a slice of the lower hub side behind it, which would be a lot easier to protect. We'll do it. After all, we did it. Of course, that'd mean having the Unmentionables' headquarters in here with us. That's like pitching your tent over a nest of vipers. We'll handle that. We handled it. A couple of elderly people pushing a cart full of miscellaneous belongings approached the barricade. They gave Vimes a look of mute pleading. He nodded towards it and they scuttled through. All we need now is... Sarge? Fred Colon was leaning over the top of the heap. He looked more out of breath than usual. Yes, Fred. There's lots of people coming across the Ponds Bridge. There's things happening everywhere, they say. Shall we let them in? Any soldiers? I don't reckon so, Sarge. It's mostly old people and kids, and my granny. Trustworthy? Not when she's had a few pints. Let them in, then. Said Colon. Yes, Fred. Some of them is watchmen. A few of the lads from Dimwell and a lot from Kingsway. I know most of them, and those I don't know are known to the ones I do, if you catch my meaning. How many? About 20. One of them's Di Dickens, sergeant at Dimwell. He says they were told they'd got to shoot people, and most of them deserted on the spot. Quit, Fred, said Vimes. We don't desert, we're civilians. Now, I want young Vimes and you and Waddy and maybe half a dozen others out here fully kitted up in 2 minutes, understand? And tell Wiglet to organise squads ready to move the barricades forward at my signal. Move them, Sarge? I thought barricades stood still. And tell Snout he's got 2 minutes to find me a bottle of brandy, said Vimes, ignoring this. A big one. Are we taking the law into our own hands again, Sarge? Said Colon. Vimes stared at the entrance to Cable Street and was aware of the weight of the cigar case in his pocket. Yes, Fred. Only this time we're going to squeeze. The two guards on the Unmentionables' headquarters watched with interest as the small contingent of watchmen marched up the street and came to a halt in front of them. Oh, look, it's the army, said one of them. What do you want? Nothing, sir, said Corporal Colon. Then you can push off. Can't do that, sir. I'm under orders. The guards stepped forward. Fred Colon was sweating, and they liked to see things like that. It was a dull job, and most of the Unmentionables were out on more interesting assignments. They entirely failed to hear the soft tread behind them. Orders to do what, mister? Said one of them, looming over Colon. There was a sigh and a soft thud behind him. Be a decoy? Quavered Colon. The remaining guard turned and met a Mrs. Goodbody No. 5 negotiator coming the other way. As the man slipped to the ground, Vimes winced and massaged his knuckles. Important lesson, lads, he said. It hurts, no matter what you do. You two, drag these two into the shadows to sleep it off. Vimes and Nancy Ball, you come with me. The key to winning, as always, was looking as if you had every right, nay, duty to be where you were. It helped if you could also suggest in every line of your body that no one else had any rights to be doing anything, anywhere, whatsoever. It came easily to an old copper. Vimes led the way into the building. There were a couple of guards inside, heavily armed, behind a stone barrier that made them ideally placed to ambush any unwise intruders. They put their hands on the hilts of their swords when they saw Vimes. What's happening out there? Said one. Oh, people are getting restless, said Vimes. Getting very bad across the river, they say. That's why we've come for the prisoners in the cells. Yeah? On whose authority? Vimes swung his crossbow up. Mr. Burley and Mr. Strong in the Arm, he said, and grinned. The two guards exchanged glances. Who the hell are they? Said one. There was a moment of silence, followed by Vimes saying, out of the corner of his mouth, Lance Constable Vimes? Yes, sir. What make are these crossbows? Heinz Brothers, sir. They're Mark III's. Not burly and strong in the arm? Never heard of them, sir. Damn. 5 years too early, thought Vimes. And it was such a good line, too. Let me put it another way, he said to the guards. Give me any trouble and I will shoot you in the head. That wasn't a good line, but it did have a certain urgency, and the bonus was it was simple enough, even for an unmentionable, to understand. You've only got one arrow, said a guard. There was a click from beside Vimes. Sam had raised his bow too. There's two now, and my lad here is in training, so he might hit you anywhere, said Vimes. Drop your swords on the floor. Get out the door, run away. Do it now, don't come back. There was a moment of hesitation, just a moment, and then the men ran for it. Fred will watch our backs, said Vimes. Come on. All the watch houses were pretty much the same. Stone steps led down to the cellars. Vimes hurried down them, swung open a heavy door, and stopped. Cells never smelled that good at the best of times. At the best of times, even at Treacle Mine Road, hygiene consisted of a bucket per cell and as much slopping out as Snouty felt inclined to do. But at the worst of times, the cells below Treacle Mine Road never smelled of blood. The beast stirred. In this room there was a big wooden chair. In this room there was by the chair a rack. The chair was bolted to the floor. It had wide leather straps. The rack held clubs and hammers. In this room, that was all the furnishings. The floor was dark and sticky. Down the length of it a gully ran to a drain. Boards had been nailed over the tiny window at street level. This wasn't a place where light was welcomed. And all the walls, and even the ceiling, were padded heavily with sacks stuffed with straw. Sacks had even been nailed to the door. This was a very thorough cell. Not even sound was meant to escape. A couple of torches did nothing at all for the darkness except make it dirty. Behind him, Vimes heard Nancy Ball throw up. In a strange kind of dream, he walked across the floor and bent down to pick up something that gleamed in the torchlight. It was a tooth. He stood up again. A closed wooden door led off on one side of the cellar. On the other, a wider tunnel almost certainly led to cells. Vimes took a torch out of its holder, handed it to Sam, and pointed along the tunnel. There were footsteps accompanied by a jingle of keys heading towards the door, and a light growing brighter underneath it. The beast tensed. Vimes dragged the largest club out of the rack and stepped swiftly to the wall beside the door. Someone was coming, someone who knew about this room, someone who called themselves a copper. Getting a firm two-handed grip, Vimes raised the club and looked across the stinking room and saw young Sam Vimes watching him. Young Sam with his bright shiny badge and face full of strangeness. Vimes lowered the club, leaned it delicately against the wall, and pulled the leather cosh from his pocket. Shackled, not quite understanding, the beast was dragged back into the night. A man stepped through the door, whistling under his breath, took a few steps into the room, saw young Sam, opened his mouth, and then fell fast asleep. He was a big man and hit the cobbles heavily. He had a leather hood over his head and was naked to the waist. A big ring of keys hung from his belt. Vimes darted into the corridor behind the door, around a corner, burst into a small, brightly lit room, and grabbed a man he found in there. This one was a lot smaller, and suppressed a scream as Vimes dragged him up out of his chair. "And what does Daddy do at work all day, mister?" he roared. The little man was suddenly clairvoyant. One look at Vimes's eyes told him how short his future might be. "I'm just a clerk, I just write things down," he protested. He held up a pen by way of desperate demonstration. Vimes looked at the desk. There were compasses there, and other geometers' tools, symbols of Swing's insane sanity. There were books, and folders stuffed with paperwork, and there was a yard-long steel ruler. He grabbed it in his spare hand and slammed it on the desk top. The heavy steel made a satisfying noise. "And," he said, his face a few inches from the struggling man, "and I measure people. It's all in the captain's book. I just measure people. I don't do anything wrong. I'm not a bad man." Again the ruler slammed into the desk, but this time Vimes had twisted it, and the steel edge chopped into the wood. Want me to cut you down to size, mister? The little man's eyes rolled. Is there another way out of here? Vimes slapped the rule down on the desk. The flicker of eyes was enough. Vimes saw a doorway in the wall, almost lost in the wooden panelling. Good. Where does it come out? Now Vimes was nose to nose with the man who, in police parlance, was helping him with his inquiries. You're all alone here, he said. You have no friends here. You sat and took notes for a torturer, a bloody torturer. And I see a desk, and it's got a desk drawer, and if you ever want to hold a pen again, you'll tell me everything I want to know. Warehouse, the man gasped. Next door. Right, sir. Thank you, sir. You've been very helpful, said Vimes, lowering the limp body to the floor. Now, sir, I'm just handcuffing you to this desk for a moment, sir, for your protection. Who from? Me. I'll kill you if you try to run away, sir. Vimes hurried back to the main chamber. The torturer was still out cold. Vimes hauled him up into the chair with great effort and pulled off his hood, and recognised the face. The face, yes, but not the person. That is, it was the kind of face you saw a lot in Ankh-Morpork. Big, bruised, and belonging to someone who'd never quite learned that hitting people long after they'd lost consciousness was a wicked thing to do. He wondered if the man actually liked beating people to death. They often didn't think about it. It was just a job. Well, he wasn't about to ask him. He buckled him in with every strap, even the one that went across his forehead, pulling the last one tight just as the man came round. The mouth opened, and Vimes stuffed the hood into it. Then he took the keyring and locked the main door. That should ensure a little extra privacy. He met young Sam coming the other way as he headed for the cells. The boy's face was white in the gloom. Found any? Said Vimes. Oh, Sarge. Yes? Oh, Sarge. Sarge. Tears were running down the Lance Constable's face. Vimes reached out and steadied himself. Sam felt as though there were no bones left in his body. He was trembling. There's a woman in the last cell, and she... Sarge. Try taking deep breaths, said Vimes. Not that this air is fit to breathe. And there's a room right at the end, Sarge. Oh, Sarge, Nancy Ball fainted again, Sarge. You didn't, said Vimes, patting him gently on the back. But there's... Let's rescue what we can, shall we, lad? But we were on the hurry-up wagon, Sarge. What? Said Vimes, and then it dawned. But we didn't hand anyone over, lad, he said, remember? But I've been on it before, Sarge, all the lads have. We just handed people over and went back to the watch house for cocoa, Sarge. Well, you'd had orders, said Vimes, for what good that did. We didn't know. Not exactly, thought Vimes. We didn't ask. We just shut our minds to it. People went in through that front door, and some of the poor devils came out through the secret door, not always in one box. They hadn't measured up, nor did we. He heard a low, visceral sound from the boy. Sam had spotted the torturer in the chair. He shook himself away from Vimes, ran over to the rack and snatched up a club. Vimes was ready. He grabbed the boy, swung him round, and twisted the thing out of his hand before murder was done. No, that's not the way. This is not the time. Hold it back. Tame it. Don't waste it. Send it back. It'll come when you call. You know he did those things, shouted Sam, kicking at his legs. You said we had to take the law into our own hands. Ah, thought Vimes. This is just the time for a long debate about the theory and practice of justice. Here comes the shortened version. You don't bash a man's brains out when he's tied to a chair. He did. And you don't. That's because you're not him. But they stand to attention, Lance Constable, shouted Vimes, and the straw-covered ceiling drank and deadened the sound. Sam blinked through reddened eyes. OK, Sarge, but are you going to snivel all day? Forget about this one. Let's get the living out, right? Hard to tell with... Sam began, wiping his nose. Do it! Follow me! He knew what was going to be in the dark arches of the cell tunnels, but that didn't make it any better. Some people could walk, or maybe hop. One or two had just been beaten up, but not so badly that they couldn't hear what was going on just out of sight and dwell on it. They cringed when the gates were opened, and whimpered as he touched them. No wonder Swing got his confessions. And some were dead. Others were, well, if they weren't dead, they'd just gone somewhere in their heads. It was as sure as hell there was nothing for them to come back to. The chair had broken them again and again. They were beyond the help of any man. Just in case, and without any feeling of guilt, Vimes removed his knife and, well, gave what help he could. There was not a twitch, not a sigh. He stood up, black and red storm clouds in his head. You could almost understand a thug, simple as a fist, being paid decent money for doing something he didn't mind doing. But Swing had brains. Who really knew what evil lurked in the heart of men? Me. Who knew what sane men were capable of? Still me, I'm afraid. Vimes glanced at the door of the last room. No, he wasn't going in there again. No wonder it stank here. You can't hear me, can you? Oh, I thought you might. Vimes went to help young Sam bring Nancy Ball round. Then they half-carried, half-walked the prisoners out along the passage up into the warehouse. They laid them down and went back and dragged out the clerk, whose name was Treblecock. Vimes explained to him the advantages of turning King's evidence. They were not major advantages, except when they were compared with the huge disadvantages that would follow swiftly if he refused to do so. At that point, Treblecock, entirely of his own free will, volunteered. And Vimes stepped out into the early evening. Colon and the squad were still waiting. The whole business had taken only 20 minutes or so. The corporal saluted, and then his nose wrinkled. Yes, we stink, said Vimes. He unbuckled his belt and pulled off his breastplate and chainmail undershirt. The filth of the place had crawled everywhere. Okay, he said, when he no longer felt he was standing in a sewer. I want a couple of men at the entrance over there in the warehouse, a couple round the back with truncheons, and the rest ready out here. Just like we talked about, okay? Wallop them first, arrest them later. Right, sir, Colon nodded. Men set off. And now, give me that brandy, Vimes added. He unwrapped his neckerchief, soaked it in spirit, and tied it around the neck of the bottle. He heard the angry murmur from the squad. They'd just seen Sam and Nancy Ball bringing out some of the prisoners. There was worse, said Vimes, believe me. Top middle window, Fred. Right, Sarge, said Fred Colon, dragging his eyes away from the walking wounded. He raised his crossbow and neatly took out 2 window panes and a glazing bar. Vimes located his silver cigar case, removed a cigar, lit it, applied the match to the brandy-soaked rag, waited for it to catch, and hurled the bottle through the window. There was a tinkle, a whoomph of exploding spirit, and a flame that rapidly grew. Nice one, Sarge, said Fred. I don't know if this is the right time, Sarge, but we brought an extra bottle while we were about it. Really, Fred? And what do you say? Fred Colon glanced at the prisoners again. I say we use it, he said. It went through one of the ground floor windows. Smoke was already curling out from under the eaves. We haven't seen anyone go in or out apart from those guards, said Fred as they watched it. I don't reckon there's many left in there. Just so long as we destroy the nest, said Vimes. The front door opened slightly, increasing the draught of the fire. Someone was checking. They'll wait until the last minute and come out fighting, Fred, Vimes warned. Good, Sarge. It's getting darker, said Fred Colon grimly. He pulled out his truncheon. Vimes walked round to the back of the building, nodded at the watchman waiting there, and locked the door with his stolen keyring. It was a narrow door anyway. Anyone inside would surely go for the big doors at the front, where they could spread out quickly and an ambush wasn't so easy. He checked on the warehouse, but that was an unlikely exit for the same reason. Besides, he'd locked the door to the cellar, hadn't he? Young Sam grinned at him. That's why you left the torturer tied up, eh, Sarge? He said. Damn! That hadn't occurred to him. He'd been so angry with the clerk he'd forgotten all about the brute in the chair. Vimes hesitated, but burning was a horrible death. He reached for his knife and remembered it was back in its sheath in his sword belt. Smoke was already drifting up the passage into the warehouse. "Give me your knife, Sam," he said. "I'll just go and check on him." The Lance Constable handed over the knife with some reluctance. "What are you going to do, Sarge?" "You just get on with your job, Lance Constable, and I'll do mine." Vimes slipped down into the passage. "I'll cut one strap," he thought. "They're fiddly to undo, and then, well, he'll have a chance even in the smoke. That's more than anyone else got." He crept through the office and into the chamber. One torch was still alight, but the flame was just a nimbus in the yellow haze. The man was trying to rock the heavy chair, but it had been secured firmly to the floor. Some thought had gone into that chair. The straps on the buckles were hard to reach. Even if a prisoner got one hand free, and that hand had not yet felt the professionalism of the torturer, they'd have a job to get out of the chair in a hurry. He reached down to cut a strap, and heard a key in the lock. Vimes stepped swiftly into the darker shadows. The door opened, letting in the noise of distant shouting and the crackle of burning timber. It sounded as though the unmentionables were making a run for the clear air of the street. Find These Swing stepped delicately into the room and locked the door behind him. He stopped when he saw the seated figure and examined it carefully. He walked to the office doorway and looked inside. He peered into the cells, but by then Vimes had moved soundlessly around a wall. He heard Find Thee sigh. There was the familiar sound of moving steel, followed by a small, organic sort of noise and a cough. Vimes reached down for his sword. But it was up on the road too, wasn't it? Down here, the song in his head came back louder, with the background clink of metal that was always part of it. "See how they rise up, rise up, rise up." He shook his head as if that had dislodged the memory. He had to concentrate. Vimes ran into the room and made a leap. It seemed to him that he stayed in the air a long time. There was the torturer, blood on his shirt. There was Swing just sliding the blade back into the stick. And Vimes, airborne, armed with just a knife. "I'm going to get out of this," he thought. "I know, because I remember this. I remember Keel coming out and saying it was all over. But that was the real Keel. This is me. It doesn't have to happen the same way." Swing jerked aside with surprising speed, trying to tug the blade out again. Vimes hit the sacks on the wall and had the sense to roll away immediately. The blade slashed down beside him, spilling straw onto the floor. He'd expected Swing to be a bad swordsman. That ridiculous stick suggested it. But he was a street swordsman. No finesse, no fancy moves, just some talent at moving the blade quickly and sticking it where you hoped it wasn't going to go. Fire crackled in the corner of the ceiling. Dripping spirit or sheer heat had worked itself through the heavy floorboards. A couple of the sacks began to blossom thick white smoke, which rolled above the men in a spreading cloud. He circled the chair, watching Swing intently. "I believe you are making a grave mistake," said Swing. Vimes concentrated on avoiding the sword. "Hard times demand hard measures. Every leader knows that," said Swing. Vimes dodged, but continued circling, knife at the ready. "History needs its butchers as well as its shepherds, Sergeant." Swing jabbed, but Vimes had been watching his eyes and swayed away in time. The man wasn't bleeding. He didn't understand what had been done to require it, but he could see Vimes's face. There was no emotion in it at all. "You must understand that in times of national emergency we cannot be too concerned with the so-called rights of—" Vimes darted sideways and along the haze-filled corridor to the office. Swing lurched after him. The blade sliced Vimes on the back of the leg. He sprawled onto the clerk's desk. Swing circled to find a stabbing point. He drew back the sword. Vimes's hand came up holding the steel ruler. The smack of its flat steel against the blade knocked it right out of the captain's grasp. Vimes pulled himself upright as though in a dream, following on the curve of the stroke. "Send it back into the dark until you need it." He turned the ruler as the backstroke began, and it whispered through the air, edge first, leaving the hazy smoke rolling and coiling behind it. The tip caught Swing across the neck. Behind Vimes, the white smoke tumbled out of the corridor. The ceiling of the bloody chamber was falling in. But he stayed, watching Swing with the same blank, intent expression. The man had raised his hands to his throat, blood spurting from between his fingers. He rocked, gasping for a breath that couldn't come, and fell backwards. Vimes tossed the ruler on top of him and limped away. Outside, there was the thunder of moving barricades. Swing opened his eyes. The world around him was grey, except for the black-clad figure in front of him. He sought, as he always did, to learn more about the new person by carefully examining their features. Your eyes are, your nose is, your chin—" He gave up. "Yes," said Death. "I'm a bit of a tricky one. This way, Mr. Swing." Lord Winder was, thought Vetinari, impressively paranoid. He'd even put a guard on the top of the whisky distillery that overlooked the palace grounds. 2 guards, in fact. One of them was clearly visible as you rose over the parapet, but the other was lurking in the shadows by the chimneys. The late Honourable John Bleedwell had spotted only the first one. Vetinari watched impassively as the young man was dragged away. If you were an assassin, being killed in the pursuit of your craft was all part of the job, albeit the last part. You couldn't complain. And it meant that there was only one guard now, the other one taking Bleedwell, who had lived up to his name, downstairs. Bleedwell had worn black. Assassins always did. Black was cool, and besides, it was the rules. But only in a dark cellar at midnight was black a sensible colour. Elsewhere, Vetinari preferred dark green or shades of dark grey. With the right colouring and the right stance, you vanished. People's eyes would help you vanish. They erased you from their vision. They fitted you into the background. Of course, he'd be expelled from the guild if caught wearing such clothing. He'd reasoned that this was much better than being expelled from the land of the upright and breathing. He'd rather not be cool than be cold. The guard, 3 feet away, lit a cigarette with no consideration for other people. What a genius Lord Winstanley Greville Pipe had been. What an observer. Havelock would love to have met him, or even to have visited his grave, but apparently that was inside a tiger somewhere, which, to Greville Pipe's gratified astonishment, he hadn't spotted until it was too late. Vetinari had done him a private honour, though. He had hunted down and melted the engraver's plates of some observations on the art of invisibility. He tracked down the other 4 extant copies too, but had felt unable to burn them. Instead, he'd had the slim volumes bound together inside the cover of Anecdotes of the Great Accountants, Volume 3. He felt that Lord Winstanley Greville Pipe would rather appreciate that. Vetinari lay comfortably on the lead of the roof, patient as a cat, and watched the palace grounds below. Vimes lay face down on a table in the watch-house, wincing occasionally. "Please hold still," said Dr. Lorne. "I've nearly finished. I suppose you'd laugh if I told you to take it easy." "Ha ha! Ow! It's only a flesh wound, but you ought to get some rest." "Ha ha! You've got a busy night ahead of you, so have I expect." "We should be okay if we've got the barricades all the way to Easy Street," said Vimes, and was aware of a telling silence. He sat up on the table that Lorne was using as bench. "We have got them to Easy Street, haven't we?" he demanded. "The last I heard, yes," said the doctor. "The last you heard?" "Well, technically no," said Lorne. "It's all getting bigger, John. The actual last I heard was someone saying, 'Why stop at Easy Street?'" "Oh, good grief." "Yes, I thought so too." Vimes dragged his breeches up, fastened his belt, and limped out into the road and an argument. There was Rosie Palm and Sandra and Red Shoe and half a dozen others sitting around another table in the middle of the street. As Vimes stepped out into the evening, a plaintive voice said, "You cannot fight for reasonably priced love." "You can if you want me and the rest of the girls on board," said Rosie. "Free is not a word we wish to see used in these circumstances." "Oh, very well," said Reg, making a note on a clipboard. "We're all happy with truth, justice and freedom, are we?" "And better sewers." This was the voice of Mrs. Rutherford. "And something done about the rats." "I think we should be thinking about higher things, comrade Mrs. Rutherford," said Reg. "I am not a comrade, Mr. Shue, nor is Mr. Rutherford," said Mrs. Rutherford. "We've always kept ourselves to ourselves, haven't we, Sidney?" "I've got a question," said someone in the crowd of onlookers. "Harry Supple's my name, got a shoe shop in Cobblers." Reg seized on this as an opportunity to avoid talking to Mrs. Rutherford. Revolutionaries should not have to meet someone like Mrs. Rutherford on their first day. "Yes, Comrade Supple," he said. "Nor are we boy-joys," said Mrs. Rutherford, not willing to let things go. Bourgeoisie," said Reg. "Our manifesto refers to bourgeoisie. That's like bourgeoisie." Bourgeoisie, said Mrs. Rutherford, turning the word over on her tongue. "That doesn't sound too bad. What sort of thing do they do?" "Anyway, it says here in Article 7 of this here list," Mr. Supple ploughed on. "People's Declaration of the Glorious 24th of May," said Reg. Yeah, right. Well, it says we'll seize hold of the means of production sort of thing. So what I want to know is, how does that work out regarding my shoe shop? I mean, I'm in it anyway, right? It's not like there's room for more than me and my lad Garbett and maybe one customer." In the dark, Vimes smiled. Reg could never see stuff coming. "Oh, but after the revolution, all property will be held in common by the people. That is, it'll belong to you, but also to everyone else. Do you see?" Comrade Supple looked surprised. "But I'll be the one making the shoes." "Of course, but everything will belong to the people." "So who's going to pay for the shoes?" said Mr. Supple. "Everyone will pay a reasonable price for their shoes, and you won't be guilty of living off the sweat of the common worker," said Reg shortly. "Now, if we—" "You mean the cows?" said Supple. "What?" "Well, there's only the cows and the lads at the tannery, and frankly all they do is stand in the field all day. Well, not the tannery boys, obviously, but—" "Look," said Reg, "everything will belong to the people, and everyone will be better off. Do you understand?" The shoemaker's frown grew deeper. He wasn't certain if he was part of the people. "I just thought we didn't want soldiers down our street and mobs and all that lot," he said. Reg had a hunted look. He made a dive for safety. "Well, at least we can agree on truth, freedom and justice, yes?" There was a chorus of nods. Everyone wanted those. They didn't cost anything. A match flared in the dark, and they turned to see Vimes light a cigar. "You'd like freedom, truth and justice, wouldn't you, Comrade Sergeant?" said Reg encouragingly. "I'd like a hard-boiled egg," said Vimes, shaking the match out. There was some nervous laughter, but Reg looked offended. "In the circumstances, Sergeant, I think we should set our sights a little higher." "Well, yes, we could," said Vimes, coming down the steps. He glanced at the sheets of paper in front of Reg. The man cared, he really did, and he was serious, he really was. "But, well, Reg, tomorrow the sun will come up again, and I'm pretty sure that whatever happens we won't have found freedom. And there won't be a whole lot of justice, and I'm damn sure we won't have found truth. But it's just possible that I might get a hard-boiled egg. What's all this about, Reg?" "The People's Republic of Treacle Road," said Reg proudly. "We are forming a government." "Oh, good," said Vimes. "Another one, just what we need. Now, does anyone of you know where my damn barricades are gone?" "Hello, Mr. Keel," said a glutinous voice. He looked down beside him. There, still wearing his hugely oversized coat, but now with the addition of a helmet much too large for him, was Nobby Nobbs. "How did you get here, Nobby?" "My mum says I'm insidious," said Nobby, grinning. A concertina sleeve rose to the vicinity of Nobby's head, and Vimes realised that somewhere in there was a salute. "She's right," said Vimes. "So, where—" "I'm acting constable now, Sarge," said Nobby. "Mr. Colon said so. Gave me a spare helmet. I'm carving myself a badge out of what's that, like waxy kind of stuff, like candles, but you can't eat it?" "Soap, Nobby. Remember the word." Right, Sarge, and then I'm going to carve a... Where have the barricades gone, Nobby? That'll cost... I am your sergeant, Nobby. We are not in a financial relationship. Tell me where the bloody barricades are. Probably near to Short Street, Sarge. It's all got a bit metaphysical, Sarge. Major Clive Mountjoy Standfast stared blankly at the map in front of him, trying to find some comfort. He was, tonight, the senior officer in the field. The commanders had gone to the palace for some party or other, and he was in charge. Vimes had conceded that the city's regiments had quite a few officers who weren't fools. Admittedly, they got fewer the higher you went, but by accident or design, every army needs, in key if unglamorous posts, men who can reason and make lists and arrange for provisions and baggage wagons, and in general have an attention span greater than a duck. It's their job to actually run things, leaving the commanding officer free to concentrate on higher matters. And the Major was indeed not a fool, even though he looked like one. He was idealistic, and thought of his men as jolly good chaps, despite the occasional evidence to the contrary, and on the whole did the best he could with the moderate intelligence at his disposal. When he was a boy, he'd read books about great military campaigns, and visited the museums and looked with patriotic pride at the paintings of famous cavalry charges, last stands, and glorious victories. It had come as rather a shock, when he later began to participate in some of these, to find that the painters had unaccountably left out the intestines. Perhaps they just weren't very good at them. The Major hated the map. It was the map of a city. A city wasn't a place for cavalry, for heaven's sake. Of course there had been casualties among the men. 3 of them had been deaths. Even a cavalry helmet is not a lot of use against a ballistic cobblestone. And a trooper had been pulled off his horse in Dolly Sisters and, bluntly, mobbed to death. And that was tragic and terrible, and, unfortunately, inevitable once fools had decided to use cavalry in a city with as many alleys as Ankh-Morpork. The Major didn't think of his superiors as fools, of course, since it would follow that everyone who obeyed them were fools. He used the term unwise, and felt worried when he used it. As for the rest of the casualties, 3 of them had been men knocked senseless by riding into hanging shop signs while pursuing, well, people, when it came down to it, because with the smoke and darkness who could tell who the real enemy was? The idiots had apparently assumed that anyone running away was the enemy. And they'd been the luckier idiots, because men who rode their horses into dark alleys which twisted this way and that and got narrower and narrower, and then realised that it had all gone quiet and their horse couldn't turn round, well, they were men who learned how fast a man could run in cavalry boots. He totted up the reports. Broken bones, bruises, 1 man suffering from friendly stab by a comrade's sabre. He looked across the makeshift table at Captain Tom Wrangle of Lord Salarchi's Light Infantry, who glanced up from his own paperwork and gave him a weak smile. They'd been at school together, and Wrangle, the Major knew, was a lot brighter than him. "What's it look like to you, Tom?" said the Major. "We've lost nearly 80 men," said the Captain. "What? That's terrible." "Oh, about 60 of them are deserters, as far as I can see. You tend to get that in this sort of mess. Some have probably just popped home to see dear old Mum." "Oh, deserters. We've had some of those too. In the cavalry. What would you call a man who leaves his horse behind?" "An infantryman. As for the rest, well, as far as I can see, only 6 or 7 of them went down to definite enemy action. 3 men got stabbed in alleyways, for example." "Sounds like enemy action to me." "Yes, Clive, but you were born in Quirm." "I know because my mother was visiting her aunt and the coach was late," said the Major, going red. "If you cut me in half, you'd find Ankh-Morpork written on my heart." "Really? Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that," said Tom. "Anyway, getting murdered in alleyways is just part of life in a big city." "But they were armed men, swords, helmets." "Valuable loot, Clive." "But I thought the City Watch took care of the gangs." Tom looked at his friend over the top of his paperwork. "Are you suggesting that we ask for police protection? Anyway, there isn't any, not any more. Some of the watchmen are with us, for what good they are, and the rest either got beaten up or ran away." "More deserters?" "Frankly, Clive, everyone's drifting away so fast by tomorrow we'll be feeling pretty lonely." The men paused as a corporal brought in some more messages. They thumbed through them gloomily. "Well, it's gone quiet anyway," said the Major. "Supper time," said the Captain. The Major threw up his hands. "This isn't war. A man throws a rock, walks round a corner, and he's an upstanding citizen again. There's no rules." The Captain nodded. Their training hadn't covered this sort of thing. They'd studied maps of campaigns with broad, sweeping plains and the occasional patch of high ground that had to be taken. Cities were to be laid siege to or defended. They weren't for fighting in. You couldn't see, you couldn't group, you couldn't manoeuvre, and you were always going to be up against people who knew the place like their own kitchen. And you definitely didn't want to fight an enemy that had no uniform. "Where's your lordship?" said the Captain. "Gone to the ball, same as yours." "And what were your orders, may I ask?" "He told me to do whatever I considered necessary to carry out our original objectives." "Did he write that down?" "No." "Pity. Neither did mine." They looked at one another. And then Wrangle said, "Well, there's no actual unrest at the moment, as such. My father said all this happened in his time. He said it's best just to keep the lid on it. There's only a limited number of cobblestones, he said." "It's almost 10, said the Major. "People will be going to bed soon, surely." Their joint expression radiated the fervent hope that it had all calmed down. No one in their right mind wanted to be in a position where he was expected to do what he thought best. "Well, Clive, provided there's no—" the Captain began. There was a commotion outside the tent, and then a man stepped inside. He was blood-stained and smoke-blackened, his face lined with pink where sweat had trickled through the dreadful grime. A crossbow was slung across his back, and he'd acquired a bandolier of knives. And he was mad. The Major recognized the look. The eyes were too bright, the grin too fixed. "Ah, right," he said, and removed a large brass knuckle-duster from his right hand. "Sorry about your sentry, gentlemen, but he didn't want to let me in, even though I gave him the password. Are you in charge?" "Who the hell are you?" said the Major, standing up. The man seemed unimpressed. "Carcer. Sergeant Carcer," he said. "A sergeant? In that case you can—" "From Cable Street," Carcer added. Now the Major hesitated. Both the soldiers knew about the unmentionables, although, if asked, they probably wouldn't have been able to articulate exactly what it was they knew. Unmentionables worked in secret, behind the scenes. They were a lot more than just watchmen. They reported directly to the patrician. They had a lot of pull. You didn't mess with them. They were not people to cross. It didn't matter that this man was only a sergeant. He was an unmentionable. And what was worse, the Major realized that the creature could see what he was thinking and was enjoying the view. "Yep," said Carcer, "that's right, and it's lucky for you that I'm here, soldier boy." Soldier boy, thought the Major. And there were men listening who'd remember that. Soldier boy. "How so?" he said. "While you and your shiny soldiers have been prancing around chasing washerwomen," said Carcer, pulling up the tent's only vacant chair and sitting down, "the real trouble's been happening down Treacle Mine Road. Do you know it?" "What are you talking about? We haven't had any reports about any disturbances down there, man." "Yeah, right. Don't you think that's strange?" The Major hesitated. A vague memory bobbed at the back of his mind, and there was a grunt from the Captain, who pushed a piece of paper across to him. He glanced at it and recalled. "One of my captains was down there this afternoon and said everything was under control," he said. "Really? Whose control?" said Carcer. He leaned back in his chair and put his boots on the desk. The Major stared at them, but the boots showed no sign of embarrassment. "Remove your feet from my desk," he said coldly. Carcer's eyes narrowed. "You and whose army?" he said. "Mine, as a matter of fact." The Major looked into Carcer's eyes and wished he hadn't. Mad. He'd seen eyes like that on the battlefield. Very slowly, with exaggerated care, Carcer swung his feet off the table. Then he pulled out a handkerchief, made grimy with unguessable humours, huffed theatrically on the wood, and polished it industriously. "I do beg your pardon so very much," he said. "However, while you gentlemen have been keeping your desk nice and clean, a canker, as they say, is eating at the very heart of the city. Has anyone told you that the Cable Street watchhouse has been burned to the ground? With, we believe, the loss of the lives of poor Captain Swing and at least one of our, technical people." "Swing, begots," said Captain Wrangle. "That is what I said. All the scum your lads have been driving out of Dolly Sisters and all the other nests, well, they've ended up down there." The Major looked at the report. "But our patrol said that everything seemed to be in hand. The watch were very visible on the streets, and people were showing their flag and singing the national anthem," he said. "There you are, then," said Carcer. "Do you ever sing the national anthem in the street, Major?" "Well, no." "Who did his lordship set down there?" said Wrangle. Major Mountjoy Standfast thumbed through his papers. His face fell. "Rust," he said. "Oh dear, that's a blow." "I dare say the man is dead," said Carcer, and the Major tried not to look slightly more cheerful. "The person in charge down there now calls himself Sergeant Keel, but he is an impostor. The real Keel is in the mortuary." "How do you know all this?" said the Major. "We, in the particulars, have ways of finding things out," said Carcer. "I've heard," murmured the captain. "Martial law, gentlemen, means that the military comes to the aid of the civil power," said Carcer, "and that's me right now. Of course, you could send a couple of runners up to the ball, but I don't reckon that'd be a good career move. So what I'm asking is for your men to assist us with a little surgical strike." The Major stared at him. There was now no limit to the distaste he had for Carcer, but he hadn't been a major for very long, and when you've just been promoted you hope to stay that way long enough for the braid to get a tarnish. He forced himself to smile. "You and your men have had a long day, Sergeant," he said. "Why don't you go along to the mess tent while I consult with my fellow officers?" Carcer stood up with a suddenness that made the Major flinch, then leaned forward with his knuckles on the desk. "You do that, Sonny Jim," he said, with a grin like the edge of a rusty saw. Then he turned and strode out into the night. In the silence that followed, Wrangle said, "His name is on the list of officers that Swing sent us yesterday, I'm afraid. And he's technically correct about the law." "You mean we have to take orders from him?" "No, but he's entitled to request assistance from you." "Am I entitled to refuse?" "Oh, yes, of course, but—" "I'd have to tell his lordship why." "Exactly." "But that man's an evil bastard. You know the sort, the kind that joins up for the pillaging, the kind you have to end up hanging as an example to the men." What now?" "Well, he's right about one thing. I've been looking at the reports, and, well, it's odd. It's all been very quiet down towards Treaclemine Road." "That's good, isn't it?" "It's unbelievable, Clive, when you put it all together. Even the watch house didn't get attacked, it says here. And your Captain Burns says he met this Keel chap, or someone who said he was Keel, and he says that if the man's a watch sergeant, then he, Burns, is a monkey's uncle. He says the man is used to serious command. I think he rather took to him, to tell you the truth." "Ye gods, Tom, I need some help here," said the Major. "Then send out some gallopers right away. A little informal patrolling, perhaps. Get some proper intelligence. You can afford to wait half an hour." Right, good idea," said the Major, steaming with relief. "See to it, could you?"